The television flickered with the muted sounds of a late-night talk show, but my attention was far from the screen. Lisa had just returned from her usual evening walk, a routine we'd established years ago, a small slice of solitude for her after a busy day. Tonight, however, the familiar rhythm of her return was jarringly off-key. The front door clicked shut, and instead of the usual soft call of my name, she entered with an almost theatrical flourish. "Honey, I'm home," she announced, her voice a touch too bright, the kind of forced cheerfulness you might hear from someone trying too hard to appear carefree. My gaze drifted from the screen to the hallway, where she stood silhouetted against the dim porch light. Her cheeks were flushed, a vibrant pink that seemed out of place for a cool evening stroll. She was already halfway up the stairs before I could even offer a greeting. "Just going to change," she called down, her tone almost rushed, as if she couldn't shed her walking clothes quickly enough. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. It was subtle, this feeling, a whisper of something being amiss, but it was persistent. Lisa usually lingered for a few minutes after her walks, telling me about the neighbor's new puppy or the unusual bird she'd spotted in the park. Tonight, there was none of that. A moment later, she brushed past me in the living room, heading towards the kitchen. She still hadn't met my eyes. "Just grabbing a glass of water," she mumbled, her gaze fixed on the countertop. As she passed, a faint scent, unfamiliar and subtly musky, tickled my nostrils. It wasn't her usual light floral perfume, nor did it smell of the crisp evening air. It was something else, something warmer. I watched her from the corner of my eye as she poured herself a glass of water, her movements jerky and uncharacteristic. She seemed almost agitated, her fingers tapping nervously against the glass. I noticed a slight dishevelment in her usually perfectly styled hair, a few strands sticking out near her temple. And then, as she turned to leave the kitchen, I saw it, a faint smudge of something dark on her lower calf, which she quickly rubbed with her hand as if trying to erase it. My mind began to race, piecing together these small, disjointed observations. The forced cheerfulness, the averted gaze, the unusual scent, the rushed behavior, the disheveled hair, the smudge. Individually, they meant nothing, but together, they painted a picture that sent a shiver of apprehension down my spine. "Everything all right, honey?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual, masking the growing anxiety that was beginning to churn within me. She stopped abruptly, her back still to me. There was a slight hesitation before she turned, and when she did, her smile seemed a fraction too wide, not quite reaching her eyes. "Of course, why wouldn't it be?" she replied, her tone a little too defensive, a little too quick. "Just seemed a bit rushed tonight," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. "Oh, you know me," she laughed, a light, airy sound that didn't quite convince me. "Always eager to get out of those walking shoes." She took a quick sip of her water, her eyes flitting around the room, avoiding mine. The way she was acting, the subtle inconsistencies in her demeanor, it was all starting to feel like a carefully constructed performance. A seed of doubt, tiny but persistent, began to sprout in my mind. Was I just being paranoid? Was I reading too much into these insignificant details? Or was there something more, something hidden beneath the surface of our seemingly comfortable life? Later, as we lay in bed, the silence between us felt heavier than usual. Lisa was already feigning sleep, her breathing deep and even. But I lay awake, my mind replaying the events of the evening, each small detail magnified under the lens of my growing suspicion. The unfamiliar scent lingered in my memory, a subtle yet potent reminder that something was not right. A cold dread washed over me, the unsettling feeling that a line had been crossed, a boundary breached. The thought of marital discord, something I had always considered foreign to our relationship, now loomed in the darkness, casting a long and ominous shadow over our shared bed. I closed my eyes, but sleep remained elusive. The image of that faint smudge on her leg burned into my mind, a tangible mark of the unease that had settled over our home. The moment Lisa's breathing deepened, feigning sleep beside me, I knew I wouldn't find any rest. The unsettling feeling from earlier had solidified into a cold certainty. I slipped out of bed, the floorboards creaking softly beneath my bare feet, and made my way to the laundry room. The dim light filtering from the hallway illuminated the overflowing basket. I spotted them almost immediately. Lisa's favorite pair of dark wash jeans, the ones she always wore on her evening walks. I reached into the basket, my fingers brushing against other items before finding the denim. They felt heavier than usual, and as I pulled them out, the dampness was unmistakable. It wasn't the light moisture you'd expect from a cool evening. These were significantly wet, as if they'd been soaked through. A wave of nausea washed over me. What could have made them this wet on a clear night? My fingers instinctively explored the pockets. In the back pocket, nestled amongst a crumpled tissue, I felt something soft and damp. I pulled it out. It was Lisa's underwear, also soaked. The implication hit me with the force of a physical blow. A hurried encounter, a sudden downpour. Neither explanation seemed plausible. The image of the smudge on her leg flashed in my mind, and the pieces started to fall into place, forming a picture I desperately didn't want to see. I carried the jeans and the underwear back to the bedroom, the damp fabric clammy in my hands. Lisa hadn't moved. I laid the clothes on the bedside table, the faint, unfamiliar scent from earlier now seeming stronger, almost acrid. I stood there for a moment, the silence amplifying the frantic beating of my heart. I needed answers. I waited until the first hint of dawn began to paint the sky a pale gray before I gently nudged Lisa awake. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open, a look of sleepy confusion on her face. "Morning," she mumbled, reaching for me. I pulled back slightly, the damp jeans and underwear a silent accusation on the table beside her. Her eyes followed mine, and as she registered what they were, the sleepiness vanished, replaced by a flicker of something else. Apprehension? Guilt. "What's this?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral, but I could detect a tremor beneath the surface. I picked up the jeans, the wet denim heavy in my hand. "These were in the laundry," I said, my voice calm but firm, betraying none of the turmoil raging inside me. "They're soaking wet, Lisa. And so is this." I held up her underwear. Her eyes widened slightly, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw panic flash across her face. "Oh," she said, her voice a little too high-pitched. I must have gotten caught in a sudden shower last night. It came out of nowhere, you know. "Lisa," I said, my gaze unwavering. "There wasn't any rain last night. The weather was perfectly clear." She shifted uncomfortably in bed, pulling the duvet closer to her chest. "Well, maybe I spilled some water on myself. I was really thirsty after my walk." Her excuses sounded flimsy, almost childish, and her inability to meet my eyes only solidified my growing certainty. "You expect me to believe that you soaked your jeans and your underwear just by spilling a glass of water?" Her silence was deafening. She finally looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "Look, it's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is, Lisa," I said, my voice still calm, but with an edge of steel. "Tell me why your jeans and underwear were soaking wet when there wasn't any rain. Tell me about the unfamiliar scent I noticed. Tell me why you were so rushed and wouldn't look me in the eye last night." She hesitated, her lips trembling slightly. I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to come up with a believable explanation. But the evidence was right there, tangible and damning. I don't know what to say," she finally whispered, her gaze dropping to her lap. The admission, however veiled, was like a punch to the gut. The knot in my stomach tightened further, and a cold wave of anger began to wash over me. "Your explanations don't make any sense, Lisa. I don't believe you." I took a deep breath, trying to control the tremor in my voice. "Give me your phone." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with alarm. "My phone? Why?" "Just give it to me, Lisa," I repeated, my voice firm, leaving no room for argument. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken accusations and the weight of a potential breach of trust. Her reluctance to hand over her phone spoke volumes, confirming my deepest fears. This was not just a case of a spilled drink or a sudden shower. Something significant had happened, and I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it might hurt. Her eyes darted around the room, landing on everything but me. It's personal," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "There's nothing on it you need to see." "Lisa," I said, my voice low and steady, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. The refusal only amplified my suspicion, turning the knot in my stomach into a hard, painful lump. "After what I found downstairs, after your unbelievable explanations, I think I have a right to know what's going on." She bit her lip, her hands twisting in the duvet. Finally, with a defeated sigh, she reached for the nightstand and reluctantly handed me her phone. Her thumb hovered over the screen for a moment, as if contemplating deleting something, before she pulled it away. The cold metal of the phone felt alien in my hand, a symbol of the growing chasm between us. My fingers trembled slightly as I unlocked it. She hadn't changed the passcode, a small, insignificant detail that felt strangely poignant. I navigated to her messages, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. There were dozens of conversations, but one name stood out: Tom. The most recent messages were from last night, around the time she was supposedly on her walk. My thumb hovered over the chat, a sense of dread washing over me. I took a deep breath and tapped it open. What unfolded before my eyes felt like a punch to the gut. The messages started innocuously enough, but quickly escalated into flirtatious banter, filled with inside jokes and emojis that spoke of an intimacy I hadn't shared with Lisa in months. Then came the more explicit exchanges. Pet names I hadn't heard in years, confessions of longing, and detailed plans for secret meetups. My breath hitched in my throat as I scrolled further up, the messages becoming increasingly intimate, revealing a depth of connection I hadn't suspected. It was a blatant breach of trust, a stark and painful revelation of marital discord that shattered the image of our happy life. My eyes scanned the screen, picking out phrases that seared themselves into my memory. "Can't wait to see you later, thinking of you all day. You make me feel so alive." Each message was a tiny shard of glass, piercing the fragile remains of my trust. Then I saw the photos. Several recent images of Lisa and a man, presumably Tom, smiling, holding hands, even one where he was kissing her cheek. They looked happy, carefree, completely at ease with each other. The sight of her radiant smile, a smile that hadn't been directed at me with such warmth in a long time, sent a wave of nausea crashing over me. Disbelief warred with a rising tide of anger. This wasn't a fleeting moment of weakness. This was an ongoing connection, a deliberate deception. I felt a cold fury building inside me, directed not just at Lisa, but also at this Tom who had so casually inserted himself into our lives. Driven by a sudden urge for confrontation, a desperate need to hear his voice, I found Tom's number within the message thread. My hand shook as I tapped the call icon. The phone rang twice before a male voice answered, a voice that sounded surprisingly ordinary, unremarkable. "Hello," he said. My throat felt tight, the words catching in my chest. Finally, I managed to force out, "This is Lisa's partner." There was a brief silence on the other end, a stunned pause that felt like an eternity. Then, without a word, the line went dead. The abrupt click echoed in the silent bedroom, a final, brutal confirmation of everything I had just read. It was a cowardly move, a silent admission of guilt that only fueled my anger. My hands were trembling so violently that the phone almost slipped from my grasp. I knew I needed to document this, to have concrete proof of this betrayal. With a shaking hand, I began taking screenshots of the messages and the photos, each click of the camera shutter a painful reminder of the trust that had been so carelessly broken. The digital evidence mounted on the screen, a damning indictment of the marital discord that had been brewing beneath the surface of our seemingly normal life. The unexpected hang-up from Tom, coupled with the undeniable proof on Lisa's phone, left me reeling, the reality of the situation crashing down around me with devastating force. What had I just uncovered? And what was I going to do next? The weight of Lisa's phone felt like a leaden brick in my hand. I tossed it onto the bed, the soft thud in the otherwise silent room amplifying the unspoken accusations hanging in the air. I looked at Lisa, who was now sitting up in bed, her face pale and her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and defiance. "So," I said, my voice trembling slightly, the carefully constructed calm I had maintained finally starting to crack. "Tom, huh?" Her initial defensiveness crumbled. Tears welled in her eyes, and she reached out a hand towards me, her voice a choked whisper. "Please, just let me explain." "Explain what, Lisa?" I cut her off, the anger surging through me, hot and sharp. "Explain the intimate messages? Explain the photos of you two. Together." My voice cracked on the last word. It just happened," she stammered, tears now streaming down her face. "It was a mistake, a moment of weakness. It didn't mean anything." A moment of weakness that involved exchanging loving messages and meeting up in secret? I retorted, the sarcasm dripping from my voice. "That doesn't sound like a momentary lapse in judgment, Lisa. That sounds like a deliberate breach of trust." She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. "Our relationship hasn't been the same lately," she mumbled through her tears. "You've been so distant." Her attempt to shift the blame, however subtle, only fueled my anger. "So, instead of talking to me, instead of trying to work through whatever issues you felt we had, you decided to seek solace in someone else's arms?" She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "I know it was wrong. I'm so sorry. Please, can't we just forget this ever happened? I promise it won't happen again." I stared at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw not the woman I had built a life with, but a stranger. The weight of the betrayal pressed down on me, suffocating me with a grief so profound it felt physical. I thought of all the years we had spent together, the promises we had made, the future we had meticulously planned. It all felt like a lie now, a carefully constructed facade that had just crumbled into dust. "Forget it ever happened?" I repeated, the words laced with disbelief. "Lisa, I just saw messages where you told another man you loved him. I saw photos of you two. Happy. How can I possibly just forget that?" She reached for my hand again, her touch sending a shiver of revulsion through me. I pulled away. "Please," she pleaded, her voice desperate. "I love you. I made a mistake. Give me another chance." "Another chance?" I echoed, the pain in my chest tightening. "Lisa, trust is the foundation of any relationship. You've shattered that trust. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this." My mind raced, a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Anger, hurt, confusion, a deep sense of loss. I thought of the life we had built, the home we shared, the dreams we had nurtured together. It all felt tainted now, irrevocably damaged by her actions. I looked at her, her face streaked with tears, her eyes filled with a desperate plea. But all I could see was the image of her smiling in another man's arms. The pain was too raw, the betrayal too deep. "I think," I said slowly, the words heavy with finality, "that you should leave." Her eyes widened in shock. "Leave? Where would I go?" "I don't know, Lisa," I said, my voice flat. "But you can't stay here. Not tonight. Not after what I've seen. Please don't do this," she begged, scrambling out of bed and falling to her knees in front of me. "I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy. I'll cut off all contact with him. Just please, don't ask me to leave." I looked down at her, my heart aching with a pain I had never known before. There was a part of me, a small, foolish part, that still wanted to believe her, to forgive her. But the evidence on her phone, the image of her with Tom, was too stark, too real to ignore. "I'm sorry, Lisa," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't. Not tonight." The words felt like shards of glass in my mouth. The unexpected vulnerability in her kneeling posture, juxtaposed with the evidence of her deception, created a confusing and painful tableau. Despite her pleas, I knew, with a chilling certainty, that things could never be the same. The path forward was unclear, but one thing was certain. She couldn't stay here, not now, not while the raw wound of her breach of trust was still so fresh. The sight of Lisa kneeling on the floor, her face a mask of desperation, was a stark contrast to the carefree woman who had returned from her walk just hours before. Yet, my resolve held firm. The image of her smiling with another man was too deeply etched in my mind to ignore. With a heavy sigh, she finally rose, the fight seemingly draining out of her. She moved with a quiet resignation, opening the closet and pulling out a suitcase. The rustling of clothes being folded and placed inside punctuated the heavy silence that filled the room. Occasionally, a soft sniffle escaped her lips, a muffled acknowledgement of the ending of our shared life. I watched her, a strange mix of sadness and a growing detachment settling within me. It felt surreal, like watching a scene from a movie, a drama unfolding that I was both a part of and completely removed from. There were no more pleas, no more attempts to justify her actions. Her demeanor was one of quiet defeat, as if the weight of her breach of trust had finally crushed her spirit. She avoided my gaze as she moved around the room, gathering her toiletries and other personal belongings. The once familiar space now felt charged with an unspoken tension, the ghosts of our shared memories swirling around us like dust motes in the dim morning light. Finally, her suitcase was closed, the click of the latches echoing in the silence. She picked it up, her shoulders slumped with the weight of it, and turned towards the door. For a moment, our eyes met. There was a flicker of something in her gaze. Regret? Sadness? I couldn't quite decipher it. "Goodbye, then," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I simply nodded, unable to find the words. Watching her walk out of our bedroom, out of our life, felt strangely anticlimactic. There was no dramatic outburst, no final tearful embrace. Just a quiet departure, the closing of a door that marked the end of an era. Once the front door clicked shut downstairs, a profound silence descended upon the house. I stood in the middle of our bedroom, the emptiness amplifying the hollowness I felt inside. I walked through the rooms, each space holding echoes of our past. The photos on the mantelpiece, the books on the shelves, the indentation on the sofa where she always sat. It felt like walking through a museum of our life, a life that had suddenly and irrevocably changed. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the silence heavy and oppressive. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath, allowing the weight of the situation to fully sink in. There was a profound sadness, a sense of loss for the future we had planned together. But beneath the sadness, a fragile sense of liberation began to bloom. The constant unease, the subtle feeling that something was amiss, was finally gone. The truth, however painful, had brought a strange kind of clarity. I picked up my phone, my fingers finding the number I needed without hesitation. The phone rang a few times before a professional voice answered. "Good morning, this is Mr. Davies's office." "Yes, hello," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "My name is, and I need to speak to Mr. Davies about initiating divorce proceedings." The conversation was brief and to the point. I scheduled a consultation for later that week, the first concrete step towards untangling our lives. Next, I called the bank, requesting information on separating our joint accounts. Each call felt like a small act of reclaiming my life, a move towards a future I hadn't envisioned just hours before. As I hung up the phone for the last time, a sense of quiet resolve settled within me. The pain of the breach of trust was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it was no longer all-consuming. The ending of this chapter was painful, but I knew, with a growing certainty, that it was also the beginning of a new one. A future where I could rebuild, heal, and perhaps, one day, find a love built on a foundation of honesty and trust. The unexpected turn my life had taken was daunting, but I faced it with a newfound sense of determination, ready to navigate the uncharted territory ahead.